Hello, everyone. Welcome to the workshop, How to Support Your Loved One in a DV Relationship. So today, the goals that we're going to be going over is to be able to define what DV/ intimate partner violence is, as well as understand why and how this happens. To be able to know what the different warning signs are for a DV relationship and understand why it's important to be aware of the different types. To learn how you can support a victim of DV and the importance of a support system, and then to understand why self-care is important for yourself as a supporter and learn how you can practice self-care. So, before we get into this video, feel free to pause after this question and jot down some answers, say them internally, say them out loud. Before we get started, when you hear the words domestic violence, what are some initial words or thoughts that are coming to mind? So, we're going to cover what is domestic violence. So, domestic violence, also known as intimate partner violence, is a violent act that takes place within the household with intent to harm. While it can involve children or others living in the household, it's typically between the individuals in the house who have an intimate relationship. The individual who's assaulting, intimidating, abusing, etc., is attempting to gain control and power over the other individual in their relationship, and DV can happen to anyone. So before we get into facts and myths, again, feel free to pause this video. What are some myths around domestic violence that you've heard, or what are just some general thoughts around domestic violence that you've heard, maybe seen in the media? So, we're going to get into some myths and then what the facts are. So, a myth could be domestic violence happens only in low-income families. So the fact is that domestic violence happens to all kinds of families of any socioeconomic status in every part of the country and every racial, religious, or age group. The next myth is alcohol and drugs cause domestic violence. So alcohol and drugs do not cause domestic violence. DV is a choice. And then another myth is domestic violence happens only once or twice in a relationship. And the fact is that abusers usually escalate violent behaviors in frequency and intensity over time. Another myth is some people want to be beaten, they ask for it, they deserve it. Some people go from abuser to abuser, so it must be something about them. And the fact is that no one deserves to be abused. Everyone has the right to live free of violence, and no one would want to have their partner be abusive. Another myth is that children are not at risk of being hurt or injured. And the fact is that those who abuse their partners are more likely to abuse the children in the home. Domestic violence is the #1 predictor for child abuse. Another myth is if it was that bad, he or she would leave. The fact is that the individual stays in an abusive relationship for many different reasons, and it can be very difficult for them to leave, even if they want to. Like any other relationship, one that ends in abuse began with falling in love and being in love. Abuse rarely starts at the beginning of a relationship, but when it's established, it's often harder to leave. Another myth is only women are abused by men, and the fact is that anyone can be abused by anyone. While 85% of DV victims are women, 95% of perpetrators are men. DV can happen in any relationship between men and women, men and men. It can occur in lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender communities at about the same rate as heterosexual relationships. Another myth is even if he or she is abusive, it is better for children to have both parents. Children aren't affected by DV. And the fact is, witnessing violence as a child is associated with experiencing depression, trauma-related symptoms, low self-esteem. Youth that witness domestic abuse are more likely to attempt suicide, abuse drugs and alcohol, run away from home, commit other delinquent behavior, engage in teenage prostitution, and commit sexual assault crimes. And then our last myth is abusers are violent in all their relationships. So the fact is, many abusive people are only abusive with their intimate partners. So some abusers are quite successful in their professions, present a good image to others, and are very charming to other people. So now we're going to get into the warning signs. So the warning signs are actions, words, reactions, or visual items that can indicate if someone you know may be involved in a domestic violence relationship. The warning signs can look very different for every relationship. They are not the same for everyone, and these are only a limited few that we're going to talk about. So, this next question, again, jot it down, say it internally, say it out loud. If you want to pause, what are some possible warning signs that could indicate someone might be involved in a domestic violence relationship? Okay, we're going to get into the few warning signs that we could see. Um, every time you see them, the person is down or sad. You can notice certain things when they tell you about their fights, how they handle conflict, what their partner gets upset about, canceling plans abruptly, isolating themselves, new or worsening symptoms of depression, having an unusual sense of privacy surrounding their relationship, such as extreme change in privacy or self-esteem, overly apologetic, or acting as a burden, having cuts, bruises, marks on them, having arguments over matters of control, such as how they spend their money or who they hang out with, increased nervousness, puts their partner's needs over their own always, black eyes, sprained wrists, busted lip, marks on their neck that are purple or red or both, dodging questions or making jokes when asked questions, injuries from physical violence, and when asked about them, will find an excuse for them that won't make sense. And then lastly, overly covering up or not dressing appropriate for weather. So an example could be wearing a hoodie and jeans when it's 90 degrees outside. And these are only a few, it's not limited to, and these also don't exactly mean that this is happening. So we are going to get in next to the different types of abuse. So there's several different types of abuse that can happen in a DV relationship. It can be a single type of abuse, a few types, every type. It's never one size fits all, or the same situation for anybody. And it's extremely important to know the warning signs and the different types of abuse to be aware if you or someone you know is in a DV relationship in order to give them support and the help they deserve. So another question to think on before we get into them, we're going to be discussing 6 different types of abuse. What do you think the 6 types of abuse might be? Feel free to pause again, write anything down. The different types of abuse, including, are going to include physical, emotional, and psychological, sexual, financial, and technology facilitated, and we're going to discuss them specifically and what each looks like or what it might look like. And I'm going to give you guys some examples. So the first one is physical abuse, and that's any action or behavior that causes bodily harm to another person. And then these are not limited to examples, but here's a few for you. Uh, pinching, tripping, grabbing, pulling hair, choking, biting, hitting, shoving, shaking, strangling, use of objects that cause bodily harm, burning, use of physical intimidating gestures, driving dangerously, purposefully, rough handling somebody, neglect that leads to physical harm, rough handling of children or dependent adults, not allowing someone to sleep, leaving someone in an unsafe situation, slapping, punching, twisting of arms or legs, beating, pushing, use of a weapon, striking, knocking someone down, restraining in a harmful or hurtful way, scratching, kneeing, blocking someone's exit, destroying property near the person to intimidate them, physically trapping someone, force feeding or withholding food or water, use of physical punishment, preventing someone from accessing medical care, and withholding necessary medication. So these are just some types. It's not limited to. Yeah, we're gonna get to emotional and psychological abuse next. So that is when a person is subjecting or exposing another person to a behavior that might result in psychological trauma. And now to list a few examples. Um, so this could be playing mind games, treating victim like a servant, making victim feel bad about themselves, threats of child abuse, threatening emotional or physical harm, threatening to take children away, threatening to harm family members, gaslighting, excessive jealousy, yelling or screaming, mocking or humiliating someone, silent treatment is a form of punishment, refusing to communicate, threats to expose secrets if the victim doesn't comply, make victim feel guilty for being independent, placing blame on victim for the abuser's actions, sabotaging victim's job, school, or personal goals. Abuser has extreme mood swings, putting the victim down, not allowing the victim to make decisions, placing the blame always on the victim, threatening suicide or self-harm, threatening to publicly reveal the victim's sexual orientation, threatening or harming pets, isolating victims socially, constantly challenging decisions, insulting, name calling, or belittling, using a hostile tone to intimidate, body shaming, intelligence shaming, or trait shaming, withholding approval or affection as a weapon, threats to harm themselves if the victim doesn't comply, preventing or discouraging contact with family, friends, support system, blaming victim for things outside of their control, publicly or privately shaming the victim, undermining the victim's autonomy, and making the victim responsible for the abuser's emotions. Again, this is not limited to, these are just some, and it could be more than one, it could be just one. But we're going to get into sexual abuse next. So sexual abuse is when someone tries to control the sexual intimacy and physical component of the relationship. So I'm going to list off some more examples. So treating the victim as a sex object, making the victim perform sexual activities against their will, making the victim dress in a sexual way that they're uncomfortable with, non-consensual sexual contact or touching, forcing the victim to perform sexual acts, sabotaging birth control to force pregnancy or risks, using threats, intimidation, or violence to obtain sexual compliance, using authority or power to pressure someone into sexual acts, any sexual contact with a minor, as minors cannot consent in any capacity, sexual harassment in any form, hurt the victim with weapons or objects during sex, insulting the victim in sexual ways or calling them explicit names, any unwanted physical touch, even in a relationship or marriage, any sexual contact with the victim who is asleep, unconscious, intoxicated, or incoherent. Demand sex as a condition of safety, affection, money, housing, etc. Reproductive coercion, such as pressuring the victim to become pregnant or terminate pregnancy. Forcing someone to watch pornography or sexual acts against their will. Recording or sharing sexual images without consent. Exposing themselves intentionally to the victim without consent. And coercing or pressuring sex to the point where the victim feels like they can't say no. And again, with the other examples, these are not limited to. Um, so we're going to get into financial abuse next. So financial abuse is when someone takes advantage or control over someone else's finances. And to get into some examples, preventing victim from viewing or accessing bank accounts, not allowing victim to have a separate bank account, providing an allowance and closely monitoring how the victim spends it, including requesting receipts, maxing out the victim's credit cards without permission and not paying the credit card bills or harming their credit score, forcing the victim to provide them with their tax returns, withdrawing money from children's savings accounts without the victim's permission, sabotaging employment, threatening to cut off financial support as a way to control, misusing power of attorney, guardianship, or joint account, stealing money from victim, their family, or their friends, depositing the victim's paycheck into an account they can't access or see, stopping the victim from working, limiting their hours, getting them fired, or forcing them to work certain jobs, refusing to provide money for necessary or shared expenses such as food, clothing, transportation, medical care, and medicine, living in the victim's home but refusing to contribute financially, refusing to work or not help with chores, controlling all the money and giving the victim little to no access to the account, requiring the victim to ask permission to buy necessities, stealing financial documents or valuables from the victim, and pressuring the victim to sign financial documents. And again, this is not limited to, we're going to talk about technology facilitated abuse last, which is online abuse. It's the use of technology or technological platforms to bully, harass, stalk, intimidate, or to control someone. So telling the victim who they can or cannot follow or be friends with, sending the victim negative, insulting, or threatening messages or emails, sending, requesting, or pressuring the victim to send unwanted explicit photos, videos, sex, or other compromising messages, creating fake social media profiles with the victim's name and photos to embarrass or isolate them, looking through the victim's phone or checking up on their pictures, texts, and phone records, stealing or insisting on being given the victim's account passwords, tracking the victim's location without their consent, insulting or humiliating the victim in their posts online, including posting unflattering photos or videos, using social media to track the victim's activity, constantly texting the victim, making the victim feel like they can't be separated from their phone, using smart home technology to track the victim's movements, communications, and activities, using any kind of technology such as spyware or GPS to monitor the victim's activity, demanding immediate responses from the victim, and then threatening to post private information or secrets. So, again, not limited to, and I know that hearing these examples can be triggering, so please feel free to pause this video and ground if you need to. Or you can come back to it, take a breather, grab a drink, get comfortable, just take it at your own pace. So we're going to get into the impacts on the victim next. So DV can have extensive short and long-term impacts on the victim and or their children. A few topics we will be discussing today is the impact on physical health, homelessness and poverty, mental health, and the impacts on the children or child. So, what are some possible physical health impacts that a victim of DV could experience? And again, please feel free to pause the video. Okay, so getting into physical health, DV can have impacts on the person's physical health, especially if they're experiencing physical abuse, which can include bruising, burns, cuts, broken bones, and more serious injuries. In turn, the trauma can come with experiencing DV can increase the risk of cardiovascular disease, hypertension, gastrointestinal disease, diabetes, arthritis, obesity, chronic pain, sexual/reproductive issues, traumatic brain injury, and or HIV or AIDS. DV can also result in death. And then we're going to get into homelessness and poverty. When the victim is considering leaving, they don't always have the finances to get another place or have a support system that can provide them with shelter, which can result in the victim and or their children becoming homeless for a while or indefinitely. In turn, victims could be at a stay-at-home parent, um, or they can be a stay-at-home parent and or have not been allowed to work since being in this relationship. So they may be completely or partially financial dependent on their abuser. And considering this, when it comes to leaving the situation, this factor can prevent someone from leaving entirely as they don't have the financial capability to do so or have anyone else to support them. Additionally, if the victim does leave, it may take a very long time to build themselves back up and be able to obtain financial assistance, obtain a job, obtain a credit card, maybe build their credit back up, etc. So, another question for us, and again, feel free to pause. What are some possible mental health impacts that a victim of DV could experience? Okay, so now we're going to get into the mental health aspect, and the impacts that DV can have on a victim could include, and are not limited to, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, eating disorders, low self-esteem, self-harm, and or suicide attempts. In addition, victims may experience difficulties with emotional regulation, dissociation, numbing, and difficulties with reading social cues. And then some impacts of the children. So, children of parents who are involved in a DV relationship can experience short and long-term impacts as well. A few of the impacts could be including likely to be abused in their lifetime, having poor school performance, increase in illness, increase in likelihood of experiencing depression and or anxiety, increased likelihood to experience negative health outcomes in adulthood, and increased likelihood for male children to become abusers, and increased likelihood for female children to become victimized in adulthood. So next we're going to get into why the victim isn't leaving their current situation. So it's very common to wonder why the victim doesn't just get up, grab their things, and leave. So while it may seem simple to someone who isn't involved or hasn't experienced a DV relationship, It's way more complex than what we see on the surface level. In addition, even after the victim leaves, sometimes they go back to the relationship, and on average, it takes a victim 7 times to leave the DV relationship permanently. So, another question for us before we get into it. Why do you think it might be hard for a victim to leave, or why they might go back to the abusive relationship? And again, feel free to pause. Okay, so there are a variety of reasons that might make it more difficult for the victim to leave or go back. So it's important to understand that the victim doesn't stay in the relationship because they enjoy being abused, but that they have a variety of reasons that make it more difficult to leave. So additionally, there are a wide variety of reasons that they might go back, and these reasons could be and are not limited to shared family, feeling that they can't survive on their own, children, homelessness, feelings of worrying what others will think, thinking, I made this choice to marry them, I have to stay, disability, low self-esteem, normalized abuse, financially dependent, only relationship slash life they've ever known, lack of financial support, feelings of shame and guilt, not wanting to admit that they made the wrong choice, thinking, I made my bed, now I need to lie in it, cultural context, love, and fear. So, next, we're going to talk about supporting the victim. So it's extremely important to support the victim as being in a DV relationship can be very traumatic. Unfortunately, we can't make the victim leave, and it has to be a choice of their own. But by supporting the victim emotionally, being there for them, holding space for them, providing them with a safe space, validating them, allowing them to be vulnerable, to feel that they can talk to you without judgment and respecting their boundaries, you're helping them in healing their journey or in their healing journey and providing a support system that is ready for them once they are ready to leave that relationship. And then I want to talk about listening, believing, and respecting. So it's important to simply listen to the victim, as this can be very difficult for them to talk about. Don't pressure them to talk about it or to share more details. Don't shame, blame, or guilt them. In order to remove someone from a bad situation, they need to have a strong support system, which can be hard to find. So while they may not be ready to leave, you should believe them, respect their choice, and continue to keep that line of support open. And then I want to touch on providing resources so you can provide them with the domestic violence hotline information, as well as other resources that focus on providing support to DV victims. Additionally, you could introduce the idea of a safety plan to them and or ask if they have a safety plan. So if they already have one, you could ask them what their plan entails, and if they don't, you can help them make one, which we're going to get into next. So, how to make a safety plan. So safety plans are created to have in place to keep for yourself and or others, such as your children, pets, safe while in this relationship, or when planning to leave the relationship, or after you've already left the relationship. So safety plans are important as they allow for the victim to safely reconstruct their lives, have control over how a situation will turn out, prepare for different situations, gather essential items in advance, help with decreasing fear and anxiety, and ensure as much safety as possible. So, another question. What are some questions you could ask the victim or the victim could ask themselves when considering to make a safety plan? And go ahead and pause for this one if you'd like to. So, some questions to ask the victim when making a safety plan. You can ask, what moments do you feel most unsafe in your relationship? What helps you stay safe as possible during those moments? Are there places in your home that you avoid during an argument? Are there places in your home where you feel safer in? If you had to leave quickly, what items would you want to make sure that you take with? Is there a safe place in your home you could keep important items and or an emergency bag? Who in your life knows what you're going through or could provide you with support? And is there a code word could use with someone you trust in case of an emergency? And these are just a couple questions. You can ask them other ones that you think would be helpful to construct a safety plan. So I want to get into a safety plan for a victim while they're living with an abuser. So victims can create a safety plan while still being in a relationship with the abuser. These type of plans can help keep the victim, their children, and or their pets safe when violence occurs. So if the victim is looking to create this type of safety plan, there are a few factors they should consider before the violence happens, during the violent episode, and after the violence happens. So another question, before we get into the factors to consider, what do you think the victim should consider when making their plan? And again, feel free to pause. Okay, so before the violence happens, it's important to plan several different ways to exit the house safely and quickly. In addition, if the victim has children and or pets, they can practice the plan with them and the victim will want to consider how they will get the pets to go with them. They can also prepare their child or children by letting them know that this isn't their fault, reinforce that violence is never okay, that their safety comes first, and to not try to protect the victim. And the victim can create a code word with them, which would let them know that they should leave the house and get help. So it can be helpful to learn, know, and practice self-defense techniques. Practicing will help the victim to feel confident protecting themselves and others if necessary. They'll want to always make sure that their phone is charged in case they need to call for help, and that they have a full tank of gas in case they need to leave in a hurry. Additionally, it's important to have an emergency phone number handy, such as 911, the domestic violence hotline, which is 1-800-799-SAFE or 7233, or a trusted family member or friend's phone number. And they can also call the domestic violence hotline at any time to discuss their options or even if they just want to talk and they're not ready to leave. They'll want to remove or hide any objects that the abuser can use as a weapon in addition. Determine safe rooms in their home where there aren't any weapons and try to stay in those spaces. A few additional factors to consider is having all important documents in one place quickly to grab, to not wear any neck accessories as it could be used to hurt them. Consider reasons to leave the house that the abuser would believe, and try to be aware of any patterns or signs the abuser has that would alert them if the situation is becoming more violent. And then next, we're going to talk about during a violent episode. So it's important to trust their gut during a violent episode. If they think the situation is going to progress, try to remove themselves and or others if possible. On the other hand, if it's not possible, try to create distance between them and the abuser and try to avoid getting trapped, such as backing into a wall or corner. Lastly, if they can't do either of those, try to make themselves small, such as huddling into a ball, protecting their face and head by putting their arms on each side of their head and interlocking their fingers like this. And then, so after the violence happens, once the episode is over and they feel safe, they can seek medical attention if needed, call the police, and file a report if they feel comfortable doing so. Contact the domestic violence hotline or their local domestic violence shelter and take photos of any evidence, as well as keep any documentation of reports and or medical visits in a safe place. So next we're going to talk about a safety plan for when the victim is ending the abusive relationship. So when the victim is ready to leave their abuser, either by themselves or with their child, children, and or pets, there are a few steps or factors to consider when making this plan. It's very important to have a plan in place as leaving the abuser can become very dangerous and or the situation can become life-threatening. The abuser may try to stop the victim and they can become extremely violent. So before we get into it, um, again, feel free to pause. Before we get into the factors to consider when leaving the relationship, what do you think the victim should consider when making their plan? So we're going to get into getting ready to leave. It's important to make a plan, which can include how they're going to leave, where they're going, and how they're going to take the others with them if needed. They'll want to take any evidence they have of the abuse with them and determine what they're going to bring with them as far as essentials. These would be car keys, driver's license, credit cards, money, checkbook, phone, charger, phone numbers, clothing, medication, legal documents, abuser's information, financial documents, personal items, and etc. This is not a limited to list. Then they'll want to prepare a bag or multiple bags, hide it in a safe space, hide an extra set of car keys, ensure that they have a full tank of gas, and let any family members or friends know that they feel comfortable doing so, and then leave when the abuser least expects it. And then after leaving, so once they have left, it's important to keep their location confidential. They should consider reaching out to a legal representative to discuss filing a protective order filing a report, and/or regarding the custody of their child or children if applicable. Consider reaching out to support programs such as food banks, financial assistance, shelters, etc. if needed, and find support through family, friends, therapists, local advocates, shelters, churches, the community, etc. Okay, so next we're going to get into practicing self-care as a support of someone in a DV relationship. So it's extremely important to practice self-care, especially when you're supporting someone in a domestic violence relationship. It's very easy to let self-care slip through the cracks or get put on the back burner. But if we don't practice self-care, it's like driving a car without getting any gas or an oil change or any maintenance at all. The car is going to continue to get worn down and eventually not work. And when looking at a person who doesn't practice self-care, the person can feel overwhelmed, exhausted, burned out, and therefore not be able to be their best selves and support others. So, self care is very important. It's way more than just lighting a candle or taking a bath or drinking an expensively crafted coffee. So, while these are great ways to feel good in the moment, it's about doing activities or practices that are going to improve your well being for the long run, not temporarily. So, self care is an active management tool and preventative measure for reducing stress, lowering the risk of anxiety and depression, improving your overall mood, and allowing you to be your best self. So, we're going to get into six types. We're going to discuss mental, physical, spiritual, intellectual, social, and environmental. Okay, so mental self care. These are practices that help declutter your mind, keep your mind active, and fill your mind with helpful knowledge. So, this is not limited to, but some examples for you: reading a book, article, journal, taking a course or a class, watching a movie, show, or documentary, completing a puzzle, a crossword, Sudoku, etc., taking a digital detox, planning out your day/time blocking, challenging negative thoughts, allowing yourself breaks throughout the day, practicing problem-solving skills, practicing grounding exercises, painting, drawing, listening to music, paying your bills on time, listening to a podcast, learning a new skill or hobby, learning a new language or languages, completing a single task, creating a to-do list, practicing reflection, setting boundaries, saying no instead of telling everyone yes and overloading yourself with too many tasks, creating a weekly intention, identifying and reframing self-limiting beliefs, knitting, playing an instrument, and crocheting. Next, we're going to get into physical self-care, which is taking care of your physical body and improving and or maintaining your health. Additionally, these practices help prevent burnout, increase energy, and improve your well-being. So before we get into it, what activities do you think would be included in physical self-care? And again, feel free to pause. Okay, so we have walking, yoga, strength training, dancing, hiking, cycling, prioritizing quality sleep. So this could be the amount of time you sleep, the environment, your pre-sleep ritual, scheduling yearly medical checkups, massages, meal prepping, practicing deep breathing, having rest days from exercise, creating a night/sleep routine, spending time outside/in the sun, getting enough sleep each night, stretching, Pilates, swimming, fitness classes or groups, canoeing, at-home workout videos, practicing hydration, taking medication and vitamins as needed, warm showers or baths, eating healthy meals, surrounding yourself with things that calm your nervous system, napping, eliminating screen time before bed, and increasing sunlight. So again, not limited to, but those are just some ideas. Next, we're going to get into spiritual self-care, which is taking care of your inner self, acknowledging your values, improving your peace, and connecting you to your purpose. So this can look like meditating, attending service, reading religious/spiritual texts, listening to calm and sacred music, volunteering, practicing gratitude, breath work, practicing your faith, mindful walking, being present in the moment, celebrating seasons, praying, attending a religious/spiritual gathering, journaling about values and or purpose, intention setting rituals, practicing compassion, being a part of a religious/spiritual community, spending time in nature, decluttering for symbolic renewal, sitting in silence, honoring ancestors, and practicing sacred rituals. So then next we have emotional self-care, which increases awareness of our feelings and being able to identify our emotions. So this next question, what activities do you think would be included in emotional self-care? And again, feel free to pause. So we have, again, these might be a little bit repetitive. They can bleed into other self-cares. So journaling, feelings without judgment, therapy, checking in with yourself and your emotions, using a feelings wheel when needed, practicing mindfulness, practice self-acceptance, setting emotional boundaries, creating a list of self-soothing activities, identifying coping strategies, practicing acceptance, identify emotions, practice creative expression, crying, and letting yourself cry, creating a calm music playlist, practicing breathwork or box breathing, practicing affirmations, saying no without guilt, identifying triggers, practicing forgiveness, and completing inner child work. Next, we're going to get into social self-care, which is improving and or increasing positive, healthy social connections in your life. So this could look like spending time with friends, families, or loved ones, scheduling weekly check-ins with others, joining a club or group, limiting contact with draining people, asking for help, planning an outing with others, practicing acts of kindness, spending time with pets, being in a relationships that are positive, going out with your work colleagues after work, calling a friend, having breakfast, lunch, or dinner with others, celebrating yours or others' milestones or accomplishments, communicating direct needs, setting communication limits, sending someone a kind message, playing games with friends, getting coffee with a friend, being in a support group, and then calling your parent or parents to catch up. Then, lastly, we have environmental self care, which includes practices focused around intentionally creating a space you enjoy, feel safe in, and supports your well being. So, what activities do you think are going to be included in environmental self care? And again, feel free to pause. So, we have decluttering a room or your room, creating a morning and nighttime environment, making your bed daily, adding cozy/mood lighting to your space, playing calm background music, adding plants to your space, decorating your space with items you enjoy or like, spending time outdoors, reducing noise pollution, removing yourself from overstimulating spaces, making your environment safe or choosing a safe environment, cleaning your living space, organize your workspace, create a home routine, adding candles or essential oils to your spaces, using natural window lighting instead of artificial light when possible, creating a Zen corner or room, keeping a tidy environment. This could be your room, your house, your car, your workspace. Opening the windows for fresh air, recycling and being mindful about consumption, exploring a new place, and choosing sustainable habits. And that is going to wrap us up for this workshop. So it is normal to feel drained, exhausted, hopeless, scared, unsure, along with a wide range of emotions during this time. It's not easy to support someone who's in a DV relationship. However, the victim is very lucky to have you by their side during this difficult time. It's important to remember that DV can happen to anyone. We can't force the victim to leave, and it's important to avoid accusations, judgments, opinions, as it may push the victim away. We want you to continue to always keep the line of support open, and you need to take care of yourself as you can't pour from an empty cup. So I appreciate you listening to this workshop today. And on the following page, there is a list of resources for you. And I hope you take care. Thank you.